Now, as I read this 4 years later, what strikes me in reflecting back in the moment is how difficult it was for me to write. Well, hi there, everybody. I am stunned that we are already up to episode 5, and I really want to thank you for listening. We've had over 500 people listen to the podcast so far, just in this short amount of time, and it's really encouraging us to keep going, and we're having a really good time, I would say, along the way. When I introduced this whole concept, I kind of mentioned that we would be speaking with lots of designers, talking about anything but design. I think we're also going to experiment and try different things rather than straight interviews. And this is one of those episodes. We're going to revisit a book I wrote called Business Thinking for Designers that I wrote back in 2019, and it was released in 2020. And I thought this would be a good time to go back and reflect on those words and sort of see if they hold up, how my thinking might be different, or what else is going on, if I might have written it in a different way. I would also like to cover a lot of the emotional stuff that I was going through while I was writing it. Writing a book is not easy, and it was my first book, and I really struggled at times to kind of keep up with the pace and have the right order of things. And so I'd like to talk about those things as well. We are, right now, it's May of 2023, and obviously the environment around the tech industry is quite different than what it was 4 years ago when I was writing the book, even 3 years ago when this global pandemic started to emerge. And so I'm going to take these opportunities and occasionally put in these episodes where we go back and reflect on business thinking for designers and whether it holds up or not. And today, we're going to jump into chapter 1. We're just going to start with the introduction chapter and walk through it. I'll read sections and then take a pause and reflect on those sections and see what has changed or what's still the same, what it was like reading the book at that time. Thanks for listening. Chapter 1. Why you need to know business. Understand the business impact of design. Within a week of starting what I thought was my dream job, I was overwhelmed. At 3 months, I was really struggling. After 6 months, I doubted my abilities to fill the role. What had worked for me as a design leader at Apple was not working at Electronic Arts. In the spring of 2011, I accepted an opportunity to shape a new organization called the Worldwide Customer Experience Team at Electronic Arts. After years of paltry customer satisfaction ratings, EA tasked WWCE with supporting a transition to a player-first organization. In my role as Senior Manager of Customer Programs, I was responsible for leading a team of UX designers, program managers, and front-end developers. I was highly motivated for the challenge and expected to excel from day one, but it did not happen. While quitting and finding another gig was an option, it didn't feel right. I had taken a big personal risk in leaving Apple to join EA. I told my family it was a risk worth taking, and I felt it was my responsibility to make it work. Choosing to stick it out ended up being the best professional decision I've ever made. By being uncomfortable yet committed, I opened myself to learning a new way to succeed. I had to adapt to survive, and that meant developing skills in an area I had previously trusted to others to handle: business. Over the last 10 years, I've been able to expand and refine these skills while leading design and strategy at companies like EA, Nestle, and USAA. What I've learned is that if you understand the basics of the business model and strategies in which you're working, you'll be able to spend less time explaining the value of design and more time actually designing. It will also increase your credibility. Developing this understanding may be easier than you think. In an effort to share best practices with others, I created my own company, Second Wave Dive, in 2019. Since then, I've worked alongside teams large and small to help mature design in their organizations. In this book, I'll pass along some of what I've learned and what I teach. But first, let's talk about why designers benefit from fostering business skills. Now, as I read this 4 years later, what strikes me in reflecting back in the moment is how difficult it was for me to write this introduction. I had lots of ideas and lots of themes that I wanted to cover. And from the editorial calendar, we set it up so that essentially we would write the book sequentially. And that was really, really hard to go about it. I don't think there was anything intentional or any deliberate, way to kind of say this is the right way. It was just how our schedule was laid out. And I remember early on, while I could sort of frame the proposal quite well, gosh, this first little bit of reflection was something that I didn't even know that I needed to include in the book. But luckily, I had the urging of Aaron Walter and Eli Woolery to put in something personal here. And so this chapter, this little section of this chapter, if you will, is something that I told the team, I think I have to write this last. I think I need to write the components of the book first, and then go back and write this introduction to really focus on this personal side, because I couldn't unwind the personal things from the business things. And so as a result, this was actually the last part of the book that I wrote, was just this entry paragraph or series of paragraphs. And if I were to write again, which might be happening, this is, I think, a technique that I would use again. I would write the introduction last. I would share the personal attributes of the framing of why I think this is important. I would write that last. Design is in demand. Design is definitely having a moment. It's being driven by the popularity of design thinking, design sprints, and Stanford's D-School, as well as the business value created by design for companies like Apple, Airbnb, IBM, Ford, Nike, Whirlpool, IKEA, and others. Business leaders now make significant investments to incorporate design to gain a competitive advantage. From startups to multinational juggernauts, titles like Chief Design Officer, Head of Design, and VP of Customer Experience are now common. Sketching is no longer just an activity for creatives. Post-its and Sharpies are the tools of the trade across functions, and business leaders across industries develop their organization's design potential. In short, we've made it. Our favorite Venn diagram worked. Business, engineering, and design equals innovation. So you may be asking, why should designers do anything different? Well, making it is different than what we expected. When lists of the top innovation companies are published, a lot of familiar faces show up. From Airbnb to Netflix to Nike, these organizations invest heavily in design to gain a competitive advantage. While many popular narratives describe how these companies turn to design, what's equally important and less discussed is how design leaders at these companies look to business to drive value. For many design leaders, making it involved years of painful business lessons. And there are many more designers out there today who still struggle to learn these lessons on their own. There has to be a better way forward. Here's my assertion. Number one, designers with the most success in our industry are business aware. Number two, the world needs more successful designers involved in strategic decisions. Therefore, more designers need to learn the language of business. Number three, applying known methodologies and tactics provides designers with the practical steps to develop business acumen faster. Now, as I think back on these two sections, and the moment that we're in 2023 with massive macroeconomic forces, lots of layoffs, the sort of really advanced pace at which AI is developing, I kind of go back here and reflecting that maybe design at the time was in high demand, more so because I think a lot of business leaders were sold on the idea that design was magic, that if we have designers in place, that somehow magic will happen. And in working with a lot of design leaders, I've seen this pattern time and time again, where organizations have hired designers at scale, and then that magic kind of didn't happen. And so in reflecting back, I see a lot of movement here, where a lot of designers were hired, but also this aspect that our favorite Venn diagram, it worked, but maybe not in the way that we expected it. And what I also have noticed that, yes, while making it is different than what we expected, that it wasn't enough that designers become business aware, or that designers learn the language of business, or these types of things. I think what's become very acutely aware for me over these years is that I think a lot of design leaders assumed that basic fundamentals of business, of product, of support, of really driving strategy and decisions at the highest levels, that those were being done, that the fundamentals were being done. And time again, I have seen and I have heard stories where designers were asking about market product fit, or which audience are we trying to serve, and getting no answers. And I think that's something that is become acutely aware, that it's not enough for designers to become business aware just so they can speak the right language. It's really designers becoming business aware to even know if those business fundamentals are being used to make decisions. And that is something that I think, in reflecting and going back, is something that I would have included here. That you may find that as you become more business aware and start leveraging and learning this acumen, that not a lot of that acumen is actually being used in certain parts of the organizations, that lots of decisions are being made without that acumen. And that's an entirely different challenge. That is now a challenge that is not about sort of rational business thinking, but really about relationships, and getting curious and looking for business partners, stakeholders, colleagues, and other functions who also want to be curious and use these business fundamentals. So in hindsight, I would say that it's even more different than what we expected. Ethics matter. Are we enabling others to do harm? What do we capture from customers in exchange for money? If customers aren't paying, how do we make money? Be it privacy, security, or politics, many companies face backlash and/or gain a competitive advantage because they align their ethical positions to those of their customers. Recent surveys confirm ethics has become an important purchasing factor. This trend is so significant that the Business Roundtable, the most influential group of corporate leaders in the United States, recently changed their mission statement for the first time since 1997. Rather than addressing only shareholder value, the new mission statement speaks to valuing customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. Even if this move is merely symbolic, leading organizations now realize ethical perceptions matter a lot. With customers using their purchasing power to support purpose-driven companies, organizations around the globe are aligning corporate values to customer values. As designers gain business acumen, we can influence the ability of our organizations to understand and live up to these values. Also, as employees, we grow more capable of finding companies whose values align with our own. Organizations need a competitive advantage. Staying one step ahead of competitors usually results in success. To do so, companies investigate different ways to create an advantage. Designers may not realize it, but our methodologies are uniquely able to help with this. Take, for instance, ground transportation. There are public options like the bus and train. There are rideshare alternatives like Lyft and Uber. And there are expensive premium services like limousines and town cars. When companies enter a crowded market with a new product or service, they make strategic decisions to differentiate themselves as the obvious choice for at least one type of customer. And while factors like pricing and availability are important to some consumers, others may be more concerned with ease of payments, scheduling, ratings, or support. As competition in a market increases, designers who understand business are uniquely qualified to highlight how these factors play out in real-world scenarios. Now, in looking back on this, I'm quite glad that I included ethics. I was talking about it a lot in the framing of the book, that I think So much of the systems that we live in that for many of us are driven around profit, shareholder value, that ethics is super, super important. And one of the things that I see is ethics are becoming a driving force, really, because of what we see in younger generations who are becoming consumers, becoming users. I mean, I have kids, and it's so dramatically different than when I grew up, around how they think about ethics and how they think about equity and how they think about sustainability. And what's interesting here, and while I'm glad I included it, I think what I would have done a little bit differently is maybe added that the reason that we should learn business is to very much understand whether we are working within an organization that is making good ethical decisions. And that's not always the case. We have to dig deeper beyond, say, just the keynote or PR release on what a company stands for in ethics. That it's quite telling when a company states something, but then you see that they're really targeting customers who are at most risk for defaulting or missing a payment or buying something that's really not within their budget. So ethics matter. I'm glad I put it in there. When talking about competitive advantage, this one is still very true. Competitive advantage is a concept that I think is important just to understand. I think there are other things other than competitive advantage that are coming into fold. But what's been really interesting, and I think is important for designers and why learning business, and here I probably would have included this as well, is that this is fundamentals. That staying one step ahead of competitors results in success, or thinking about differentiation, or trying to make decisions to be different, is a fundamental core aspect of business strategy. And yet I see this and working with the people that I have worked with over the last few years, they see this, that so many decisions are made not to be different or better, or to focus on a particular audience, that there are lots of decisions being made to just have the same things that competitors have. And in the long term, that is just not a good strategy. And this is where I think, I think when designers and design leaders start learning these things, what they might be exposed to is a lot of these decisions where we hope that our colleagues are making decisions based around differentiation or creating some competitive advantage or protecting some competitive advantage. But then when we see so many decisions being made that are really around trusting our gut, or this is how we've always done it, that is very different than business fundamentals. And oftentimes designers are put in that position of having to ask about these things that they hoped were being done. And that's a situation that I see a lot of. Becoming a leader requires spending less time on craft. Many designers aspire to lead other designers, teams, practices, and organizations. They're wonderful resources to help new designers learn how to manage others, provide opportunity and visibility to designers, to lead junior talent, and seeing the forest through the trees. The further designers progress down this path, though, the less design craft will play in day-to-day responsibilities. Craft becomes the responsibility of others on the team. A quote from Kate Aronowitz: "If you just go into the room and narrowly think about design, and if you don't value the business or understand why you have to move to the market quickly, your contribution will not be felt." As designers move into leadership roles, they are increasingly responsible for decisions that impact both customer value and the company's bottom line. This includes managing budgets, allocating resources, hiring, firing, calculating return on investment, ROI. These responsibilities are building blocks of business, regardless of industry. And while design leaders may not have to crunch numbers every day, they need the skills in order to competently participate in discussing expenses, operational planning, strategy, and the other day-to-day concerns of company leaders. Ultimately, design leadership is about building better companies and team culture. Those who do it well stretch themselves well beyond design. We're the new kids on the block. I'll be blunt. Designers need to learn business because we can't expect our counterparts to listen just because we've arrived. We need to meet them where we are. That means learning what other functions do, why it's important, and being able to bridge the communities of business, design, engineering, and product. Driven by digitalization, companies around the globe have created products and services over the last 25 years at an unprecedented scale. They've needed engineers and developers to turn big ambitions into practical realities. And now that competition is fierce, business leaders turn to designers to find new ways to create value. While the power of design is making products and services better, it's important to remember that we're joining an ongoing conversation. And the truth is, they could build things without us. It's 2020, and design is a key differentiating function for many companies, but it's still an optional function. To deal with the existing cultural norms in a business and to shape new ones, designers must show how they provide value to those functions that have been there all along. Now, looking back on these two sections, I still think they pretty much hold up. That a lot of design leadership is not about getting, say, stuck in Figma files or spending a lot of time journey mapping. I think what I would have included here, though, is that there's a lot of craft stuff that leaders could still leverage and remix. When we look at a lot of the frameworks that we have used over the years, they can be totally leveraged to kind of help us in our leadership roles. They're not finish line documents. They're really there to help us get some head starts. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our coursework is we all face a variety of situations in jobs as leaders. And one of the first things that we should really do is to take a moment and reflect and say, is this situation familiar to me? And if it is, we've likely tried something before and it worked or didn't work. And when it has worked before, those are great starting places. Those are great head starts to try to see if that works again. But if they are situations that we're not quite familiar with, well, that's where we can go back to craft and see that a lot of our methodologies, our frameworks, our approaches to problem solving can be reused because so much of them are around getting familiar with the product, getting familiar with an audience, and knowing what their needs are and what they're trying to get done and what they are hopeful for, what they're afraid of. That rudimentary stuff around core design and research is totally usable when trying to know your colleagues, when trying to get to know the priorities of the business units, the products, all these types of things. And so I think, yes, becoming a leader requires less time spent on craft, but I probably would have indicated that less time working day to day with headphones on, say, on what you think is craft, but still reusing a lot of those craft skills, just remixing them in slightly different ways. And when I think about we're still the new kids on the block, I think that largely holds up. That relatively we're still kind of early in this industry, if you will, compared to lots of other functions that have been around for a while. I think, yes, that design is still very much an optional function. It's a choice that companies can make to be different or better. And this is maybe where you disagree with me. But when we think about the basic strategies of how companies try to win or gain this competitive advantage, they either try to be different or better, which we've talked about, or they try to be a lower price, or they try to work with a niche audience. Those are core basic strategies that we'll talk in a different episode. And when I think about that, Design is then a catalyst to those things. Design is a catalyst to being better. Design is a catalyst to knowing that niche audience. Design is a catalyst to keeping prices down. And frankly, I would say that products and services can exist in the world without designers. But I don't think design can exist without products and services. And that might be, again, blunt to hear, but that's my take. That's my perspective. And when we think about the options that companies can take, being different or better is one option. How to use this book. Business models, financial portfolios, and industry regulations are not typically the focus of a designer's work. Yet each of these can be impacted by design. The tools and frameworks in this book are meant to help you evaluate fundamental business concepts. This will put you in a better position to influence strategic decisions beyond the typical purview of design. Throughout the book, I'll share advice from my experiences leading design, product strategy, and development teams and organizations. I'll also share insights from my peers and offer practical tips you can try for yourself. I've divided the book into thematic sections. Business basics you should know, develop a business perspective, transcribe design value, communicate trade-off options, putting it all together. Given that no business or organization is the same, there's no linear step-by-step learning process that applies to all situations. Therefore, the book is not meant to be followed like a process or guide. Instead, each section serves as a reference to which you can return to as needed to tune your business skills in parallel with real-world situations you face. Whether working as an in-house designer or at an agency, for a large organization or a startup, the lessons in this book will be relevant. Feel free to skip around to find the content that's most applicable in the moment, but try to keep the following mindsets as you build your business expertise. Approach it like a new language. In 2013, my family and I moved to Lausanne, Switzerland, where French is the primary language. While my wife and I had some understanding of French, we quickly realized that it would not get us very far in our day-to-day interactions. We had to find a quick way to learn. After a recommendation from friends, we began listening to the Michel Thomas method. A core principle of the method is to remove anxiety from the learning process and boost the confidence of students early and often. While we didn't become fluent overnight, within a few weeks we were able to have many of the basic conversations we needed with little stress. Developing business acumen can be a quite similar process. Accepting that business is an unfamiliar language, we can take small steps to join conversations and develop confidence through familiar methods. Over time, we'll begin to understand the different dialects used by different organizations within the business. Did you know, 20 years ago, few business leaders understood design? Agencies like IDEO, Frog, Adaptive Path, and Cooper began teaching design thinking to business leaders as a framework for innovation. In large part, it's been so successful because it reduced the stress and anxiety of learning a new approach to problem solving. As a result, business leaders simultaneously learned the language of design and bought into its value. Recognize patterns to anticipate. At the beginning of Michel Thomas's instructional audiobooks, he demonstrated that I already knew more French than I realized. Many English words ending in abile, tion, ical, and ary have the same meaning and similar pronunciation in French. In giving these examples, Thomas provided the basic patterns to build on. As a designer, I'm confident in my work when I can anticipate what users do, and I have methods and tools to familiarize myself with the patterns of user behavior. But when business leaders first began inviting me to meetings, I couldn't anticipate what they would do. As a result, I was intimidated by the people in the room and their conversations. I assumed it was all very important, complex stuff, and my confidence was shot. I was fortunate enough, though. I had a wonderful mentor at the time, Jeff Bradburn. During one of our daily walks, he reminded me that I researched every day and that the people in those meetings were just humans. It was at that moment that Jeff demonstrated that I knew more than I realized. I had the tools and methods to familiarize myself with patterns of behavior. I just needed to apply that knowledge to learning business. Now I know most business meetings are quite ordinary. The more I witness status updates, task delegations, and pats on the back, the more I recognize behavioral patterns and could anticipate what people in the room would do. Learning business is as much about anticipating the needs and behaviors as it is about learning terms and concepts. Similar patterns of behavior exist inside most organizations and industries, and the questions business leaders ask of design leaders and their teams are remarkably the same. In the sections that follow, I'll point out basic patterns to help you anticipate what happens next and to prepare for meetings. Now, with these two sections, I think they hold up really well. That really what we're talking about with this book, and what my goals were for this book was to not treat it like a linear process. I think I should have maybe spent some time in mentioning how nice it would be to have a linear process. I think for a lot of us, when we're under stress, when we're under duress, and when we're feeling a lot of that anxiety or our confidence is low, we just want an answer that will work. And I think that would be lovely. And my very hard, kind of blunt answer is that it's not so straightforward. Again, because we mentioned earlier that there's a lot of decisions that are being made that kind of aren't using fundamentals. And that when we learn fundamentals, we will start to identify the people that are using them and who are not. And those that are using them, we can have quite rational arguments with, but those that aren't, suddenly we have a relationship challenge. And I think as I was to go back and look at the book in the beginning, that yes, it was to approach it like a new language, but maybe even more so as a new dialect. Because when we think about the differences of dialects, while the same words might be being used, they have completely different meaning. You know, like French in Quebec is different than French in France is different than French in Côte d'Ivoire. And to me, that's something that maybe I would go back and highlight is, yes, you're learning a language. No, that doesn't necessarily mean that sense will be made right off the bat. When thinking about these patterns of behavior, that still holds up very, very, very much. And I think the important part here that I maybe would have included in addition to this is that we can be more of an analyst or a researcher while we sit in meetings and take notice of what transpires in these meetings and how decisions get made. Is there any pattern there? That it's not just about participating in a meeting fully all the time. That I think an important lesson, especially when you're kind of early in some career transitions where you maybe have moved up a level or you have more responsibilities or you're invited to different meetings, is to take that initial sequence of meetings and be more like a researcher and document what you observe, what you hear, what you see, these types of things. And that's a great way to rely on some design skills. And that gets us right into the next section. Rely on your design skills. Design at its core is applying intentional approach to problem solving. As you apply processes to different problems, you broaden your relevant knowledge and vocabulary. The same can be true of learning the language of business. For example, while still at Apple, I applied design methodologies to a business management problem while prototyping several digital applications. The end result went beyond expectations and ended up having a positive impact on employee retention. My point is, we can still do what we're good at, design methodology, but apply it to all the needs of the business, not just customer or user experience. Doing so helps us better communicate and partner with other teams, understand the broader effects of our work, and progress in our individual careers. Methodologies like design thinking, double diamond, lean UX, or human-centered design do more than create an interface. By applying those powerful tools to solving business problems, you will level up your business knowledge and impact. This is kind of what I was mentioning before, that this section very much is about remixing our skills, that they can be used to develop better partnerships and have better understanding very much, I still believe in this, and still a core part of what we teach in all of our programming and within our community. Have you ever seen those crazy storm chasers who will try to get as close to a tornado as possible? They speed around in vans and trucks with one eye on the clouds and another on the radar. Their goal is to know where the big cell is, which direction it's heading, and when it's expected to get there so they can find the right moment to meet it. The same is true for designers who want to get close to the action. Every project or product you work on will have a variety of elements that influence how well the project will go. Timelines, values, goals, personalities, etc. are all factors to consider in finding the right moments to converge with your colleagues. To level up your business impact, it's critical to know where your business partners are, where they're headed, and the factors shaping their viewpoints. Throughout this book, I'll teach you how to know where your business is and where it's going so you can be at the right place at the right time. Some of the exercises will be introspective in nature and may be challenging, but they're well worth the time. The 3 steps to anticipate the intersection are: Step 1, identify the direction, velocity, and intensity of your business partners. Analyze where they're coming from, what they're looking for, what their priorities are, what expectations they have, and what they expect to get when they arrive. Step 2, discern the direction, velocity, and intensity of design. Are you considering the same factors as your colleagues? Are you working from shared values? Do you have the same priorities? Are your expectations the same? Analyze where you're coming from so you can both head in the right direction. Step 3, project the potential intersections. Identify places to meet up along their journey. Suggest options for new destinations after you connect. Provide them with accountability to stay aligned in the new direction. Now, this one I first will say I would absolutely remove the word crazy. In hindsight, as soon as I read that now, it's language in a term that is not equitable in any way, and I would immediately go back on the copy editing side and remove that. When talking about identifying the intersections, I think this section was difficult for me to write because I think conceptually it's understandable, but this is really hard. It's really hard to sort of anticipate and see where your colleagues are going, what direction they're moving in. I think for a lot of us over the years, we haven't had a lot of exposure to kind of our colleagues day to day, and then that can impact our ability to kind of anticipate where they're going. It's still very important, but I would say in hindsight, I probably should have said that this is hard, that this is not easy. And I think in the book, I make it seem very easy, and it's just not the case. Use the scripts. Meeting the expectations of business leaders is a learned skill. While we all have different ways of learning, a handy script can often quicken the process. In this book, I provide scripts to limit your frustration and keep you moving in a positive direction. Scripts are useful reminders that you typically don't need to reinvent the wheel. Designers deal with business scenarios and behavior patterns across industries. These scripts, along with the other tools and frameworks, should accelerate your progress. The step-by-step scripts are provided for real-world scenarios. Examples of those scenarios include getting buy-in from your business partners, calculating the ROI, the return on investment of design, connecting design objectives to business objectives, negotiating with non-designers, and communicating trade-off decisions, risks, and benefits. Conclusion. Now that you know how this book is intended for use, you're ready to dive in. Just keep in mind that learning any new language takes time and patience. But with design methodologies in your tool belt, you're better equipped than most to investigate and recognize patterns. And soon, you'll understand how intention can directly and indirectly shape decision-making in your company. Now, when I think about these bits, I would probably emphasize scripts even more. Again, as we look back around the book and writing the book, but also in me teaching a lot of these courses and leading a lot of the community discussions. Scripts are wonderful. If you think about acting, a script is used to help an actor remember the lines, get that muscle memory, and saying those lines so that they then can begin to develop who the character is and who the character embodies. And one of the things that I think I would have changed in the book is that scripts are a great way for you to start practicing having new conversations, to start making new arguments before you are in the meeting, before you are in that high pressure situation or environment of talking to other people. That what scripts do is kind of just give us the confidence that our words and the ordering of our words are good. And that then helps us gain that confidence in the moment when we're trying to communicate. So in looking back, I probably would have written even more about scripts. Scripts are not finish line documents. Again, they are great starting points. And scripts can be used to role play. Whether you knew it or not, there are a lot of executives that are encouraged with outside facilitators and consultants to role play with each other so that they can begin to understand each other a little bit more. This is something that is used by a lot of the leading consultancies around the world that business leaders don't have it figured out, and scripts and role play are used quite often. And I think they're equally as beneficial to us as we begin to try new things. And when I just think about the conclusion, it still holds up. Designers, you may not know that you have a wonderful, wonderful base upon which to reuse and grow. That I still think that the designers who are able to understand behavior and look at things like needs and wants and desires and develop solutions around user behavior, you're really, really well equipped to develop good partnerships, to be curious with your colleagues, and to really move up into different sort of organizational leadership roles. And that's where we could lean into this tool belt and remember it rather than just forget it and try a lot of new things. So I'll stop there. That was chapter 1. And again, just in reflection, thinking about how difficult this chapter was for me to write because I was trying to write it at the beginning. So what we ended up doing at the end was I just said, I can't do it right now. I need to hold. So I ended up writing the other chapters first, chapters 1 through 6 first, and then coming back and revisiting this introduction. And that was much, much better. It allowed me to be a little bit more personal and frame what I hope this book was going to be helpful with for readers. And speaking of that, I think I was very, very conscious of the reader experience the entire time I was writing. That at times really blocked me from writing. There were days where I would get stuck writing because I was so focused and thinking about what it might be to read this and how the readers would benefit from this. Which I don't think is a bad instinct and a bad thing to have, but I did have days where I just needed to write a bunch of things down in order to get more of a critical editorial lens on them and to have others do that. So that's reflecting on chapter 1 of Business Thinking for Designers. If you've read the book, I'd love to hear going back and rereading chapter 1, what are the things that stick out? What are the things that might be different that I didn't include? We'd love feedback, and I'd love for you to reach out and let us know by just emailing us at hello@anythingbutdesign.com. It's me. It'll come to me, and I will gladly respond. I would love to hear from you. What this reflection has it brought you any insights? Are there things you would omit, or what else we should include? Cool. I'll see you next time with another interview.